Well, it's 9 o'clock. Why don't we get started? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jay Clark, and I'm here on behalf of the Creation Care team in sponsoring this morning's presentation. So I'm pleased to introduce and welcome back Dr. Stephen Jorissen as our speaker today as we start our preparations for Earth Day this week. Dr. Jorissen is a clean energy advocate who brings a wealth of technical knowledge to the subject. He received a BA in chemistry from Hamline University and a PhD in physical chemistry from Texas A&M University. And then Steve worked in industry for 31 years, 26 as the global technical manager at H.B. Fuller. Since 2019, Dr. Jorissen has been an adjunct professor of chemistry at the University of St. Thomas, where he teaches chemistry and engineering students and incorporates the science of climate change and clean energy into his chemistry courses. Steve is also quite active in the community advocating for clean energy. He's the co-leader of the Northeast Metro Climate Action Service. He serves on the Vadnais Heights Planning Commission as vice chair and also chairs the Ramsey County cluster of the Resilient Cities and Communities organization. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jorissen.
Thank you. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about mostly wind and solar. Here's the topics I'm going to cover. Going to get a quick check on where we are on our climate journey. We're going to focus today on electricity generation, specifically wind and solar, and then also what's called grid scale storage. And then we'll talk about some new developments and opportunities. Last year when I was here, I talked about the sources of carbon emissions from our economic sectors, where they were coming from. I gave a little bit about the alternatives to some of those carbon emitting sources. Today, we're going to focus a lot more on electricity generation. But first, we're going to talk about where we are. Climate advocates like to use these 4 points to get started. Climate crisis is happening already. We know that. You have to be willfully blind to the world around you to be still denying that, which unfortunately our president was in front of a microphone yesterday, in front of a large group, and saying that our planet is cooling, which is completely it's because of us. We know it's because of us. Next slide, I'll show what our carbon emissions have done to our atmosphere. We have solutions. That's what we'll be talking about today, and it's not too late. This shows global average surface temperature over the last 150 years. This is a composite from NOAA, NASA, the British Meteorological, and Japan, and I think one EU as well, put all their data together. They all have their own sensors and have been looking at global average temperatures over these years. And this is not a cooling trend, folks. This is the last 5 years have been the 5 hottest years on record. This year is shaping up to be the hottest ever. Also, a severe drought this year. One of the things we've seen is just more weather extremes from this. Drier droughts, wetter, wet periods, just a lot of extremes from this climate change that we're having. This is carbon dioxide measured mostly from in these previous years from ice core samples, air bubbles that are in ice core samples in the Greenland and Antarctic ice shelf. And you can see that for 800,000 years, our carbon dioxide content bounced between about 180 and 280 parts per million. And since the Industrial Revolution has just shot off the charts. There's just no two ways about it. Burning coal back then, burning gasoline today has risen our carbon dioxide content by over 50% over the average that it was pre-industrial. And physics, we've known for over 150 years that adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere would cause it to warm up. Eunice Foote back in the 1850s was the first to experiment with carbon dioxide and heating. Her research, because she was a woman, was suppressed for many years. A bunch of men took credit for that. And then it was just actually about 40 years ago, it was revealed her notebooks of showing that it was happening. And we've known it ever since. Any denying that is just, again, being blind to what science is telling us. So we are on a trajectory here that's not good, and we need to do something about it. Now, there's a lot of sources of carbon emissions. We talked about those last time, from agriculture to methane. But today we're going to focus on the electricity system. The world is already rapidly converting to carbon-free electricity. It's happening fast, but it's not happening fast enough. And again, we have a lot of people saying we don't need to do this because there's not really a problem. Total solar capacity has roughly doubled every 2 years. Now, globally, we're still at about 7% of all electricity generation is coming from the solar. A higher percentage is coming from wind, and then a higher percentage is coming from nuclear. But that doubling every 2 years, I mean, 10 years ago, that number was basically zero, okay? It was just, in 2015, there was hardly any solar generated electricity. And doubling every 2 years, I always think about that problem you posed when you were a kid. Do you want $1 million today or a penny a day and double it every day for a month? And you're thinking, gee, after a week, I'm only making 60 cents a day. It doesn't sound very good. But after a month, you're making $10 million a day. And that's kind of what solar is doing. It's coming up very rapidly, and but it's just kind of getting started. And the trajectory is very good. 90% of new electricity generation worldwide since 2020 has been wind and solar. We're not, well, and it actually turns out I was just listening to a energy advocate who said that the coal and gas plants that have been built since that time have been offset by the ones that have been retired. So really about 100% of all our excess electricity generation in the last 5-6 years has been wind and solar. So it's happening. It's happening. It's just not happening fast enough. So what we need to do is first clean up the electricity grid. Oh, and I'll also mention, in the United States, we had been doing 90%. And in 2025, with the administration squashing a lot of the clean energy initiatives, we do 85%. So it didn't hurt it that much. I think in the following years, it's going to get below that 85% because a lot of those projects were already in the works and everything. But it's still 85% last year of new electricity generation was wind and solar. And one of the key things of wind and solar is it can happen fast. Excuse me. We opened our first nuclear power plant last year in Georgia, first one in about 15 years or 20 years. It took 30 years from start to finish to get that thing open. And it's the most expensive way to generate electricity. It's the most expensive way. And so people are saying, oh, we just do nuclear. Wind and solar is so much better, so much cheaper, that it makes no sense to be pushing these other technologies. So first we want to clean up the grid and then electrify everything. Transportation, heating, industry, these are the things I was talking about last time, where the carbon emissions are coming from, yard equipment. One of the things I've done is, about 5 years ago, I said, I never want to buy another fossil fuel burning thing. So I got an electric lawnmower, an electric pole saw, electrified everything. I even got an electric snowblower. It's pretty decent. Wow. It got through all that snow this year.
Dr. Jorissen?
Yes.
For some reason on the Zoom call, it's still stuck on your cover for your slideshow.
Oh.
It's never gone through the slides. Is there someone that could troubleshoot that for you?
I'll troubleshoot. Okay.
Thank you.
I have a technology degree.
And just switching the screen, I think that's being
And,
shared.
if you have questions in the middle, I'm okay with being interrupted. I do want to go to my next slide if you can get me there.
I have a question.
Yes,
What does it mean to clean up the grid?
meaning getting gas, which is natural gas, or we call it fossil gas. Natural gas makes it sound like it's something very nice and bucolic. It's actually fossil fuel or coal, right? Clean up the grid means getting the carbon emitting sources of electricity shut down and replace it with wind and solar for the most part.
Can you all see that now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. This graph just came out last week. And it was it's a little complicated. The light blue is our natural gas electricity generation. The dark blue is coal. And you can see that in this is 2016. The last 10 years for the US grid, what's been generating electricity on the US grid. So the coal was the highest back in January 2016, is now the lowest. Okay, so we have been shutting down coal plants. Natural gas took over most of that during the middle of those years, and now it's starting to drop and to give over to renewables. Nuclear has stayed pretty much the same. Now, renewables in this case is wind, water, and solar, WWS. So water is hydro plants. And for the first time ever, just this March, the three combined renewables sources outpaced natural gas. So we are on a trajectory to get the dirty sources of electricity shut down and replace them with renewable. Okay, now I can.
But then I heard.
Now I can't get my thing to page.
Sorry, keep going. I'll try again.
Okay, so my next slide, I call it the cheap slide, showing how wind and solar are the cheapest forms of electricity. The head of the International Energy Agency out of France, his name is Fatih Birol, which is an agency that historically had really downplayed the role of wind and solar in our electricity generation capacity, has gotten religion, I should say. They're finally on board with wind and solar. And about 3 years ago, Fatih Birol made two major statements. One is saying solar power is now the cheapest form of energy humankind has ever known. And because it's just, I mean, the costs have come down so much, and I'll show you that on that slide. And second, we should be putting in no more fossil fuel infrastructure. It lasts too long, and we can't afford, our atmosphere, our environment can't afford 50 more years of, oh, there's my cheap slide. Okay, so on the left, I know that the type's a little small for some of you, but on the left, we have solar, PV is photovoltaic. That's what the technical people call solar panels. 90% cost reduction since 2010. What was $100 is now $10. Okay, in just 15 years. That's a huge decrease. What's that?
How much, what's the drop again?
90% drop. Yeah. And onshore wind, wind turbines we see in Minnesota and Iowa and so forth, about 70% drop. So what cost $100 back then costs $30 today. Battery storage, which we're going to talk about, is 90% drop. Battery technology is the hottest technology going right now. There's a lot of things, a lot of new technologies coming out that are really going to make that work. Offshore wind is about a 62% drop. You can see, so this group right here, Lazard, it's an investment banking firm that does this, what they call the levelized cost of energy. They take out all the subsidies, all the taxes, and say life cycle cost of solar versus coal versus natural gas. And this is a US average. So solar PV at about 4.4 cents a kilowatt hour. In some places it's cheaper than that. If you have really abundant sunshine and cheap land, for instance, like in the desert of Arizona, it's more like 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And then it's more expensive where they don't, like up in Washington or so forth, where they don't get as much sun. Onshore wind is about 3.3 cents. Again, these are the Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, all the wind that they're putting in. Offshore wind is about 7.8 cents. That's a little bit more expensive. But you look at coal is 11 cents, natural gas is 9 cents. And that's before the Strait of Hormuz and natural gas prices have gone up quite a bit. So it's probably up in that over 10 cents. Wind and solar are less than half the cost. Full, all in, life cycle cost of electricity than natural gas. It's cheaper today to put in new wind and solar than it is to run an existing coal-fired power plant. And we're very close to the cost of, well, maybe with the higher gas prices now, it's cheaper to put in new wind and solar than to run an existing gas plant. Okay, that's with an existing gas plant. Yes, sure.
What about what I've read is the difficulty of adapting the present grid, which
Yeah.
is set up for these power plants all here and there,
Right.
to a system where it can pick these
Yeah,
solar, wind.
yeah, I'll be talking about that a little bit, and it's an issue. Okay, it's a hurdle we have to overcome. But wind and solar are unreliable, right? Everybody says that wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time. Believe it or not, scientists know that. So we need to overcome, it's called intermittency. And it turns out the wind resources and solar resources we get are actually more predictable than the price of oil, or whether or not oil is going through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's actually less of a challenge, less risky to put in wind and solar than to rely on fossil fuels. And we can overcome this intermittency with what's called grid scale storage. When wind and solar are generating more electricity than we can use, we can store it and use it later. All right, these what you see here are lithium iron phosphate grid scale storage batteries, or boxcar size. There's a number of installations here in Minnesota that are storing excess electricity from solar and using and deploying it later. The demand curve in the United States, they call it the duck curve, because from midnight to midnight, you have really low usage of electricity overnight. And then in the morning, it kind of peaks when people are getting up and turning on their lights and everything. And then it kind of slouches a little bit at midday. And then the big peak is between 5 and 8 p.m. when people get home from work, turn on the TV, turn on the oven, turn up the air conditioning if it's hot outside. So it's kind of shaped like a duck. Okay, they call it the duck curve. And of course, solar is giving off most electricity during the middle of the day, during that little slouch in the middle. So what the batteries do is they store that excess electricity and load shift it. They'll deploy it when the peak happens later in the evening. That's kind of the idea behind these batteries. I'll talk about a new technology in batteries here in a minute. The other way to do that, and this has been going on for a long time, pumped hydro. And I'll show you a graphic. Hopefully this works now. Here we go. Pumped hydro is basically you have two reservoirs, one up and one down. And in the middle, you have basically a hydroelectric dam. But you also have a pump that can pump the water back up the hill. And in the United States, we've had these for a long time. The last one was actually opened in 1995. And that's for coal-fired power plants. You know, during that duck curve, they don't want to ramp up their coal plant in the middle and in the evening and shut it down at night. So they just run it like halfway all day, 24/7. Use the extra electricity that they're generating at night to pump the water up the hill, and then let it run back down at the peak, and then it supplements the coal-fired power plant. So there's a number of these. There's a lot of them in Europe as well, and China is building, and China and Australia are building really large ones. China does everything big. But so there's got renewed interest with the way that wind and solar work. And a company called Rye, they're planning pumped hydro in Washington, Kentucky, and Oregon. Yes,
Grand Coulee Dam was built with that from the beginning.
they pump water back up the hill?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's in Washington?
Right,
Yeah.
some of it goes for irrigation, but
Yeah.
it's also used for power generation
Yeah.
to get.
Yeah.
There's like 6 stations that are reversible pulse.
Yeah, so that's a really old technology. It actually lasts a lot longer, 100 years. You know, they project that those will last 100 years. The batteries will last maybe 25 or 30 years. So it's one way to go, but you do need to have the topography in order to do it. I think the vast majority of grid scale storage is going to be the batteries. And we're seeing that right now in California. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in California. It's pretty amazing. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about electricity prices. Now, nationwide, electricity prices have gone up faster than the rate of inflation. The average in the US has gone up faster than the rate of inflation. Not every state, though. States that have a lot of renewable power, especially the wind power, which right now wind is about 18 or 19% of our electricity generation. Solar is between 5 and 7, something like that. So those states I mentioned before, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, their electricity rates have gone up a lot less than states that are putting in data centers, like Virginia and Massachusetts. Data centers are huge electricity users. A single data center can use as much electricity as the city of St. Paul. The one that they're proposing down in southern Minnesota would use as much electricity as the entire city of St. Paul. And and they're proposing a lot. There's 12 of them being proposed for the state of Minnesota right now. I'm sure you've been reading about those in the news. People are protesting because there's a lot of secrecy about opening those up. But where data centers have been put, electricity rates have gone up because the demand has gone up so much that they've got to run their gas peaker plants more. But where there's renewable energy, that has not, the electricity rate has not gone up enough. Now, California is a little different. California's rates have gone up mostly because of wildfires. The utilities are paying off huge fines for the wildfires that they caused and passing that cost back onto the ratepayers, as well as they have to upgrade their grid so they don't cause new wildfires. That's a huge expense they're passing on to the ratepayer. And a third issue in California is that the rates have gone up so much that people are really motivated to put on solar panels and home battery storage. And what I did here, this is a major utility in California. What their daily electricity generation was April 12th, 3 years ago, compared to April 12th this year. And a couple of things you notice right away. The total amount of electricity that they generated for their service area went down a lot, from 536 thousand megawatts to 362,000 megawatts. That's a big drop. That's because so many people put on solar panels and they don't need to use the grid anymore. The second thing you'll notice is solar power went from 19% up to 32%. And that's the utility solar power. That's not counting all the solar that was added by the homeowners. So if you can assume that extra 180,000 megawatts is all from solar, this is well over 50% solar between the homeowners and the utility. You notice the gas, this was the gas peaker plants that they had to fire up during the peak hours from 5 to 8, was 36% of their of a big piece of a big pie, and now it's only 10%. So the amount of gas that this California utility used 3 years ago was 194 gigawatts worth, and now they're using 36 gigawatts. That's an 80% reduction in gas use in 3 years. That's what can happen when the right circumstances, with the right motivations, and the right incentives to go solar, to go renewable.
Can that, does that affect the homeowners as well?
Yeah,
That reduction?
right, the total reduction in the electricity. So now all those infrastructure costs are being heaped on a smaller customer base, right? Right? And so this is a spiraling thing, right? More the costs go up for the utility electricity, the more people are motivated to get their own solar panels, the fewer customers they have, and the costs just keep going up to the people who can't afford solar panels. Okay, so this is something that needs to be figured out, okay? Because it's it's just this upward spiral on that. Hydro and nuclear pretty much stayed the same. Wind actually, I don't think they really added any wind here. It just, the percentage went up because the total went down. Okay, your denominator stayed the same. What's that?
They had a huge amount to start with.
Yeah. But solar is the way they're going. A lot of the climate advocates are saying about 60% of US electricity generation will be solar power by 2050, 2060, depending on the trajectory we're going on. Because it's just so cheap. All right, one more here. This is the duck curve. If it would be the duck curve if we didn't have batteries here. What we see here, the green is solar. All right, and this is the whole state of California, this one. This is the whole state of California. Without the batteries, which is the purple that's absorbing the excess electricity down here, this would go down. This is from midnight to midnight, okay, the duck curve. It would go down in the middle of the day and then peak here in the evening. But in the middle of the day, they're taking up all that electricity by charging up the batteries. Now, 3 years ago, and I couldn't get the chart on this because they changed the way they were doing it. This big purple thing, which is now the batteries deploying between 5 and 8, was all, okay, the natural gas peaker plants are the orange. This big surge here between 5 and 8 was all orange. It was all natural gas. And now it's all batteries. So it's, again, this is the 5th largest economy in the world, has reduced overall gas use for electricity generation by 60% in 3 years. Okay, this can happen. This is how fast it can all happen. One of the other great things about wind and solar is equity. Petro-based economies funnel all the money to the top, right? Goes to the executives of oil companies, it goes to petrostates. Wind and solar are distributed energy resources, DERs. They're distributed. There's a lot of equity involved, right? A lot of people can generate their own electricity, small solar farms, small businesses getting paid for electricity generation. Okay, let's go to some, I'm not going to get through all these, obviously. But 2 of them I want to talk about that are really, really quite amazing. The first one is iron air batteries. Let me get a drink of water here. So we talked about the battery storage. A lot of the battery storage so far has been lithium iron phosphate, which is a little bit less efficient than lithium ion, but it doesn't have nickel and cobalt in it. And so quite a bit cheaper. And that's what the home batteries are, and the big boxcar sized batteries. Form Energy is converted a former steel plant in Weirton, West Virginia, which is a nice thing to do, for production of these iron air batteries. It's just iron. It's not hard to extract lithium, doesn't have cobalt or nickel. It's cheap, abundant iron. It's just rust on rust. That's the electrochemical process that stores the energy. The cost is 1/10 that of a lithium ion battery. And they will be deployed for the first time in the United States, right here in Minnesota. Great River Energy in southern Minnesota is putting in, a bunch of boxcar sized iron air batteries for their electricity generation. Excel has 2 contracts one for Becker, Minnesota, one for Colorado, to install, again, larger 3 football fields full of these box cars. Google has a contract with Form Energy. They're going to build a hyperscale data center, which again, I'm not a big fan of, but if Google is going to have the whole thing powered by iron air batteries that will be charged with brand new wind and solar. So if you're going to put in a data center, that's the way you should do it. You shouldn't be drawing off of the ratepayers getting their demand up. But this is happening. This is already in the works. There's actually some companies in Minnesota that are working on some of this technology. They got to make really small pellets because they need high surface to volume ratio. They need a lot of surface area to do all this electrochemistry storage. So this is happening. 1/10 the cost of the batteries they're putting in now. So that when I showed you the Lazar slide, the cheap slide, it's down 90%. It's going to be down, what, 98% from 15 years ago with these. I really think this is going to be the way that grid scale storage is going to happen in the US. Yes.
But they're really big, right? They have to be bigger than, right? They're much larger than a lithium size.
Well, they can put them in the same boxcar size things. Okay, they're a lot heavier. So I mean, it's not going to work in a car or something. And they're really heavy. So, and you will need a few more of them. The return trip on these is about 70% efficiency, where a lithium ion battery is about 90% efficiency. So you're losing some of that efficiency, but at 1/10 the cost. I mean, it's really cheap and abundant. We're not, buying from Bolivia or Western China lithium. That's, you have a human cost to some of those processes. It's just iron. So yes. But they'll probably they'll need a few more of those batteries than they would with lithium ion. And yes, they're very heavy, but they're just sitting in a field, so they don't need to go anywhere. The next technology I want to talk about, and then I'll just finish up here with my big ask, and that is perovskite solar. Silicon solar absorbs about 25% of the sun's rays. The wavelengths of light that silicon absorbs to generate electricity is a kind of a narrow slice of the spectrum. Perovskite absorbs in a different range. So perovskite, which is actually a little bit more abundant, it's a man-made substance with aluminum and I forget what else, but the chemistry of it. But they can do these tandem solar cells. So they lay the perovskite right over the top of the silicon. The wavelengths that the perovskite absorbs will generate its electricity, and the rest will go right through it into the silicon, and it'll generate its electricity. And we can increase the output from a solar panel by about 50%. 50% less, solar panels on your roof, 50% less solar panels out in a field generating the same amount of electricity. The downside right now is that they've got about a 5-year lifespan on them, so they're not really commercial yet. They've got to overcome the resiliency of that to get it. And I'm going to skip through my other technologies here since I don't have time, and get to this one. What can you do as a Creation Care team here? And I just read this book. It just came out last fall, called Your Guide to Climate Action by Ryan Hagan. And he goes through a lot of the stuff I just went through on why we need to do something. And then the last half of the book is basically what you can do. And the number one thing is to talk about climate change with friends and family. We've got to change the national conversation about wind and solar. Way too many people in this country think wind and solar is going to be more expensive. It's not. That's just a misnomer. That's misinformation that's been put out by fossil fuel companies and the politicians who are bought by them. That's been happening for so long that people just believe that wind and solar are going to be more expensive. It's not true anymore. It was true 15 years ago, but with the cost coming down 90%, it's not true today. So talk to friends and family. almost every climate advocate will say this is the most important thing you can do. Okay? And number two, get involved, and especially this year, vote and help out with the campaign. Now, I know in St. Paul, we're pretty bright blue here with all of our candidates, but look locally at city council, at school boards, at watershed districts, and look for candidates for those that have a real bent towards climate action. Okay? I know, even where I am up in SD 36 in Vadnais Heights, every elected official who reports to me is a Democrat other than the very top. And I think that's the same way here in St. Paul as well. But we can get involved and get and help out our candidates. Learning more about climate and clean energy, that's what you're doing today. And join or donate to a nonprofit. But the two big ones are talk about climate change. Don't back down. And you don't need to be an expert to talk about climate change. Just tell people how you feel. Tell people you're concerned. You don't need to be spouting scientific data. In fact, they show that that's counterproductive, which isn't good for me, but because that's always my first shot out of the but tell people how you feel. Tell people you're concerned. That's what sways people's. That's what gets people at least understanding that there's concern out there, right? All right. In conclusion, wind and solar are the cheapest forms of electricity generation today. Grid scale storage will overcome that intermittency issue. New technologies, which I just touched on a couple of them, will make it even better. And it's up to you to take action. All right. Any questions? Yes.
Do you have information about the distribution of energy production here in Minnesota?
Yes. Actually, Minnesota is doing quite well as far as getting to carbon free. We're about 55% carbon free right now. It's about 20% nuclear with our two big nuclear plants. We're less solar. We're only like 4 or 5% solar, and we're about 25% wind. We have all that wind out in the in western Minnesota, and really no hydro. So that ends up being, about our coal is down to about 18%, and our natural gas is then about 28% or something like that. But wind and solar combined are the largest part of that. Wind, so that's about where we are. On average, wind and solar in the United States is about combined is about 22%, and we're over 30%. There's somewhere, yeah, about 30%. Yeah.
The question about the grid that I asked you before, don't we have to completely remake the grid? A huge expense.
Oh yeah, I skipped over that one. So we do need to do a lot with the grid because as Phil pointed out, our grid was built for all these centralized power plants sending electricity in one direction to the houses. Now we have solar panels all over the place. A lot of houses are sending electricity back through those same wires back to the grid. So we got bidirectional electricity. Now the grid can handle a lot of that. And I'll just pop up to this one here. The smart grid technologies. There's some technologies now, they're called advanced power flow controllers. They can just tack these right onto the existing grid and get real-time feedback on what's going through the wires. And because they don't want to overload the wires. And if they don't have enough feedback, they're not sure how much they can put through there. So what they've shown with these advanced power flow controllers, they can increase the capacity of the existing grid by about 30%, which is a lot. Better than building all new towers and wires and everything. But we absolutely need to do a lot of upgrading on the grid. The IRA bill that was passed in 2022 gave a lot. Actually, it was the infrastructure bill, the one that preceded the IRA bill in 2022, put a lot of money towards the grid, and a lot of that got wiped out. So we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on that. But yes, we do need to invest in our grid. We need to get new technologies in place that will help our existing grid be more efficient. Yes,
So, I spend time in Nebraska in the summertime, and there's three main rail lines that go east to west across Nebraska. And all the time you can look and see coal headed to the east coast, headed to the east coast, headed to the east coast. How is the Eastern Seaboard dealing with this? Because there's a huge demand there, and are they?
well, they're trying to put up the offshore wind, and it keeps getting canceled, and then they got, the judges said, no, you can put it up. So they're definitely working in that direction. They need to shut down those coal plants faster than they are. You know, it's just a lot of inertia. I mean, so a lot of people say, well, why do we need to subsidize wind and solar if it's already cheaper, right? And the answer is inertia. People don't want to change. They've got a coal plant running. It's like, well, we've been running this for 40 years. We can run it for another 10 years. And it's hard to get people to change. So we need to accelerate that with more incentives, right? Whether the incentives on the front end or on the back end, either penalize them or you give them, upfront incentives, it's the carrot or the stick, right? But the Eastern Seaboard, they're trying to do it, but they keep getting shut down by the federal government the last few years. So, but again, 90% of new electricity generation nationwide has been wind and solar for the last 5 years. So it's happening, yes.
You mentioned the railroads and the grid. I remember hearing a few years ago that they were talking about using old railroad beds for creating the grid. It's an easy place to sort of put down.
Yeah.
lines.
I haven't been that up to date on what exactly they're doing with the grid. They call our electricity grid the world's most complicated machine because it's all interconnected and there's a lot to it. And one of the things that they're doing is high volume DC power. They used to think you couldn't run electricity using direct current for long distances, and they figured that out. So they're changing a lot of the new really high power lines, high capacity power lines to DC instead of AC, which is happening. But yeah, looking at things like that, using old rail beds and so forth, the amount of energy we use to transmit or to transport fossil fuels is crazy. 40% of all transocean shipping is fossil fuels. Oil tankers, coal, liquid natural gas. 40% of all transocean shipping is fossil fuels. That's a big number. You think of all the cars and appliances that are being shipped over from China and Japan and Europe, 40% is fossil fuels. So by removing fossil fuels from our energy mix, we can solve a lot of the problems, right? I often think about how do we come up with an internal combustion engine burning gasoline to be our primary form of transportation. It's extremely complicated, from extracting the oil to refining it to moving it to putting in a car that's going to have these explosions 3,000 times a minute, and compared to plugging your car in your garage and it has like a dozen moving parts in an electric motor compared to hundreds of moving parts in an internal combustion engine. It's just better technology. Electrifying everything is better technology. Like I mentioned, my electric lawnmower, that's the best thing. It's quiet. I don't have to worry about gas. I don't have to worry about, a spark plug or air filter or anything. You press the button, it starts every time. So, you're not out there trying to pull it, and it's really amazing thing. Yes.
Yeah, just a comment. My understanding is, we're going to put solar panels on this church, and we're all set. We signed the contract and everything. The holdup is Excel can't handle that power coming in. So
that's where we need more policy. We need policy because to Excel's detriment to hook you up. They're gonna lose business when they hook you up. Okay? And that's the same with all the solar fields that are gonna be independent of Excel. You're gonna use Excel's grid. And they're not gonna get any money for it. So they're dragging their feet on these things. This is where we need policy to come in and say, you gotta do this, right?
But following that up, who are the biggest advocates for this at the state level?
Oh, Jamie Long, he's out of South Minneapolis, I think. Who's your rep here?
We're in different areas here.
Oh, yeah, okay, but, yeah.
Greater Minnesota, how about an advocate who's in Greater Minnesota? Because we always have the cities versus Greater Minnesota.
Yeah, on the state level, yeah, I'm not sure. Out of Duluth, what's her name? She was really vocal about the BWCA, and she's a big climate advocate. And I'm blanking on what her name. I think she's a senator. Jen McEwen. Jen McEwen in Duluth is a real climate advocate, and she's very outspoken. She's great. And there's somebody down in Rochester as well, in that area as well. In Mankato, unfortunately, Nick Friends, who is a Democrat, has really held up a lot of the projects on the Democrat side, trying to get. He's kind of the head of one of the energy subcommittees there, and has not been a big climate advocate, unfortunately. So a lot of our groups are like, we need to target Nick Friends to get him on board with a lot of these things to get him going. So he's down in the Mankato area. Yes, do you have a question?
No, so 25 years ago, I worked on a feasibility for a micro hydro plant in Ethiopia. And in my research and looking, then India was doing micro hydro in a lot of places and said it's far cheaper to build these and put the grid in. And so I think the mentality with the distributed generation is actually there needs to be local changes,
right,
but nationally it reduces the need for so many multi-crossing multi-states for.
Yeah, on a micro level, if you can generate your own electricity and use it in your house, you're not using the grid, that's a good thing. But when we look at system-wide, what we're looking at is if the wind isn't blowing in one area, it might be blowing in another area, and we need to move that electricity across the grid. So there's both sides of this. A lot of the micro grid things can happen without the major grid, but a lot of the utility scale clean energy, again, since it's intermittent, we need to be able to move electricity around from region to region. So there's two sides of that. I will say that like in Pakistan, they've gone from about 0 solar to 50% of their electricity is solar in about 5 years. There's a couple other countries, which was I was just reading. China. Well, China has put in more solar in the last 5 years than the rest of the world combined. They've also put in more coal plants than the rest of the world combined because their economy is growing so fast. But they're also building over 80% of the world's solar panels in China. So we're getting a lot of those from China. Everybody's getting them from China. But there's a lot going on around the world where they're bypassing this whole idea of a centralized power plant and setting up where they're putting in micro grid systems, they're putting in, home solar farms where they can just serve the regional community without going over the grid. Yes.
So there was just a big piece in the Star Tribune, and I heard about it in Europe, where you can buy solar panels and just throw them out over your banister at your house and create. And that's Pakistan. This people's individual solar panels are doing it all throughout Africa. People just throwing out a solar panel to light up their computer. We can do that here now.
Well,
with legislation.
So the utilities are pushing back on this because they're worried that, because what you do is you get these what they call balcony solar. you put them out and you plug them into your wall. And it's sending electricity into your wall. It's sending electricity back to the grid. And what the utilities, and I'm not sure if this is valid or not, the utilities are concerned that if during a power outage, so many people are putting electricity back to the grid and they have their people working on the lines, they could get electrocuted from the electricity that's being generated from the balcony
They've
solar.
been using it all throughout Europe for.
Yeah, they're doing it. Germany is it just exploded in Germany where they've allowed it. So yes, we need some legislation to allow what they call balcony solar. It's an interesting, I mean, it could be big. It could be very big. People could, like you were talking about earlier, that's basically what you're talking about, is putting up your own solar panels, powering something. We got a guy in Vadnais Heights, you know, I'm on the planning commission, and the people are complaining, this guy has these big solar panels, they're not connected to the grid. He just uses them to charge his home battery and his electric car, and people are concerned about it. And so it's like, yeah, I think we should go through the proper channels to do that, but we need legislation to allow people to do that.
And there's a bill in the House right now to, in the Minnesota House, to make that legal.
Yeah.
So like, it's perfect timing.
Yeah.
To get involved and call your representatives.
All your representative. All right, Jay said I need to be done at 10 to 10.
Can I make one announcement? So about a month from now, Eco Fair down at Summit, we've got, last year we had about 45 exhibitors. This year we have 60. There's a ton of money. Alex has been there, Dan's been there at the planning process, so come in about a month from now on the 16th, May 16th, and Saturday. It's from noon to 3, so we're gonna have a bunch of food trucks. So come get food. There's Summit Beer's gonna be there with House of Parkland. Yeah.
Great.
Good place to see all the electric car options.
Oh, okay.
There's bike options.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you very much.
yeah, can we get